The sixth meeting of 2015 of the European and External Relations Committee. Can I make the usual request that mobile phones are switched off, please? Agenda item 1. We have very tight time scale this morning with 2 evidence sessions. Agenda item 1 this morning is the Scottish Government's EU engagement and its priorities. And I'd like to welcome back to committee Cabinet Secretary for Culture and Europe and External Affairs, Fiona Hislop. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary.
Good morning.
And her trusty hand, Colin Imrie, who is the Deputy Director and Head of Europe and UK Relations at the Scottish Government. Cabinet Secretary, I believe you've got some opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Convener. Good morning, committee. Thank you for the invitation. Much has happened, I think, since I was last in front of the committee. Clearly, we've now got a new European Commission in place. Encouragingly, we have a first Vice President in charge of delivering better regulation, which is a key issue which we have argued for in our proposals for revitalising and refining the European Union. The Commission has also issued its work programme for 2015, on which Hamza Youssef wrote to you earlier this year. The programme is aimed at taking forward the EU 2020 agenda in the pursuit of smart, sustainable and inclusive economic growth. And that agenda fits well, actually, with our own programme for government and Scotland's economic strategy, which was launched last week. We've committed to making substantial revisions to our own European Action Plan, first published in 2009, and I'm grateful to members for meeting with Hamza Youssef to feed in their own thoughts on what the plan needs to cover. And we aim to launch the plan on a digital platform at the end of the month. Later today, the First Minister and I will meet with the Latvian Ambassador. The Scottish Government and the Latvian Government are also hosted a market awareness seminar in Edinburgh to explore the opportunity to deepen trade and investment links between our countries. The Latvian EU presidency has 3 overarching themes: a competitive Europe, a digital Europe and an engaged Europe, and I will leave that to the Ambassador to explain the detail of these priorities. But I just want to touch on a few particularly critical issues for Scotland. A key dossier for Scotland on competitive Europe is the European Fund for Strategic Investment, or what's known as the Juncker package, a €21 billion loan guarantee fund that is seeking to leverage a total of €315 billion to kickstart growth through investment in shovel-ready projects across the European Union. Now, the EU has already established a pipeline of projects, and Scotland currently has 4 propositions on this lengthy list, covering renewable grid infrastructure, life sciences, innovation and smart cities. And work is ongoing both to develop these proposals further and to better understand how the fund will work in practice. The general approach to the investment plan for Europe was agreed at ECOFIN on Tuesday, and we are hoping that the European Council will agree the package in March of this year, with the European Parliament signing it off in June. Following representations by Hamza Youssef at the Joint Ministerial Committee on Europe last week, the UK Government has now set up a cross-government working group to help ensure that Scotland can benefit from the funding package. On digital Europe, Scotland has ambitious goals to deliver world-class digital infrastructure, which will require hybrids of fixed fibre and mobile networks across Scotland. And meeting that aim will require continuing reform of the EU telecommunications market, including the abolition of roaming charges. And it will also require EU funding and state aid frameworks to be responsive and flexible enough to support investment in digital infrastructure that will enable all areas of Scotland to participate fully in digital Europe. And on the third item of an engaged Europe, I know that the committee and many members of the public have taken a keen interest in the TTIP negotiations. I welcome the steps the Commission has taken to be more transparent on TTIP. I hope it will go as far as possible to communicate and engage with citizens across Europe on the negotiations. And whatever the economic opportunities and challenges of TTIP for Scotland, it is essential that our and the public's concern about the impact of TTIP on the NHS is addressed. As you know, we've been pressing the UK Government and the European Commission on this point. We believe that the best way to address our concerns and those of the public is firstly to have an explicit exemption for the National Health Service in the agreement, and secondly to have absolute clarity that although the UK is the member state, any decisions that it takes in the context of TTIP, such as opening up the NHS in England to more private providers, in no way interferes with the Scottish Government's and Scottish Parliament's own devolved responsibilities. And Convener, I look forward to the outcome of your own committee's TTIP inquiry. The Scottish Government looks forward to engaging with Latvia for the remainder of its presidency. However, our overarching EU priority going forward will be to make a credible and proactive case for Scotland and the UK remaining in the EU. And I hope that the committee and indeed this Parliament might also play a role in that. I've been heartened to see other governments in the EU willing to make this case. The commitment of the Irish Government in particular has been consistent, a commitment it again underlined during my trip to Dublin last month. Since having the referendum debate, we have seen a substantially higher level of support for EU membership in Scotland than the rest of the UK. A recent Chatham House report found support in Scotland for remaining in the EU is now a remarkable 19 points higher than 2 years ago. That strong support for membership is why the Scottish Government believes that the UK for the UK to leave the EU, it should require not just a majority across the whole UK, but a majority in each constituent part of the UK, in England, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, a double majority, and I would welcome the Parliament's support for this proposal. The Scottish Government has a clear view of the benefits of our EU membership. In particular, the economic value of Scotland's EU membership is clear, and it places Scotland in the world's largest economy and trading area, capable of competing with advanced economies across the globe. And we have unimpeded access to 500 million consumers, and it's a vital export market for Scottish firms, accounting for almost half of Scotland's international exports in 2013, and that's worth £12.9 billion each year, and that's worth repeating, I think. So we welcome the social, the cultural and the economic benefits that migration from the EU delivers to Scotland's communities, and the right of freedom of movement is also of huge benefit to Scots who move to live and study and work elsewhere in the EU. The best way to tell the positive story of EU membership is, of course, to tell the individual stories of people, of businesses and sector benefits. And that is what the Scottish Government intends to do going forward. I would welcome the committee's support for that endeavour. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very, very much, Cabinet Secretary. Very comprehensive and overarching view of the work that the government's doing. You mentioned in your opening remarks the Juncker's investment package, and you said that Minister Hamza Youssef had raised some concerns around that. One of the topics that this committee keeps a watchful brief over is Horizon 2020. And there's been some confusion around how that funding is maybe being changed or less accessible for universities. I just wonder if you've got any detail to expand on that. And before I'll let you back in to answer that question, can I just congratulate the Scottish Government on signing the People's NHS pledge on TTIP for a specific exemption into the NHS services and any TTIP agreement. I've been working very closely with that organisation. I have to say they were very gladdened to see that not only did the Scottish Government sign up, but many parties across this Parliament signed up, because they view the NHS as one of our crown jewels and should be protected.
Just on that latter point, I think the committee has played an important role, and I think the evidence sessions you've had on TTIP has actually been very balanced, has, I think, shone a light on the area, and I think helped in terms of information education. Yeah. But clearly there's some political concerns, and I think it's important the committee and the Parliament and the contribution of the government has a voice from Scotland on this. So thank you for your contributions to that. The issue on the Juncker package is a serious one. Our understanding on the Horizon 2020 is it was one of the few budget lines that had substantial increase. Yeah. It was one that I know that during my time in representing the Scottish Government and the JMC Europe, we were very insistent that Horizon 2020 was an important area for the UK Government in its negotiations on the budget to push very hard. We were pleased at the result that Horizon 2020 was in a strong position. Clearly in the past, the Scottish universities in particular had achieved great results from similar packages in the past. What we understand to be happening is the Commission have identified Horizon 2020 as a source of £2.7 billion worth of reallocation to the EU budget, underpinning the European Fund for Strategic Investment, the Juncker package. So that's where the concerns are. If we lose out on the Juncker package, that means that we could have a double, could be a double whammy. However, that's the negative view of things. If you take a more positive view of things, there's no reason why we can't take best advantage of the Juncker package. Now, in terms of what the UK has said to us, and which would reflect Scotland as well, we have a fairly mature market in terms of being able to generate private investment for, in addition to public investment in a number of different areas, in particular in infrastructure, compared to perhaps the rest of the UK. So that would necessarily put us probably in a reasonably advantageous position compared to elsewhere. However, that can't be guaranteed. But it's really important, therefore, that we identify some of those areas that we can work together on. Now, if you think about the areas I talked about, interconnectors, certainly the role of our academics in terms of some of the work that needs to be involved in that, in terms of how we link the islands to the mainland and facilitate expansion of renewable energy, that whole area is redolent with opportunity. Digital healthcare, again, an area where Scotland is well placed, and it's one of the areas in terms, for example, of our Nordic plan, Baltic Nordic plan that we're putting together, we have put together. That's again an interest with other countries there in terms of being able to do activity in that area. Innovation platform, again, if you look at the Scottish economic strategy launched just last week, innovation and indeed internationalisation are key parts of it. And smart cities, I mean, just yesterday we met with the Danish ambassador. One of the areas when I was in Copenhagen was looking at livable cities, how we can exchange knowledge, information and about developments there. But I think it's a challenge, undoubtedly. I think it's worth keeping very close monitoring on, and it's something that the committee may want to keep a close eye on as well.
Yeah, I think we're going to speak to Scotland Europa and get that side of the story as well, and try to put it all together and keep on top of it. Going to open questions, Jamie McGregor.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. The Scottish Government's action plan on European engagement dates back to 2009, when Mike Russell was the Minister. So it's probably due a refreshment. Now, when the Minister for Europe and International Development spoke informally to the committee about the ongoing process of refreshing the EU election plan, he suggested that it was too narrowly focused at the moment. And I remember some time ago, I asked why agriculture was not covered, because, with the CAP being so important, it's actually taking up such an enormous amount of the budget, and the fact that agriculture is enormously important to Scotland, it seems odd that it's not covered in there. And I suppose what do you consider the Scottish Government's main achievement in terms of its EU engagement under the action plan?
Well, a couple of things on that. You'll recall, because obviously Ms McGregor is a long-standing member of this committee, that on an annual basis I've basically provided an update on what we've done with the action plan, but also in wider areas, and continually there's probably the most intense activity and indeed the most regular attendance that councils have been on agriculture in particular, and obviously one of the key areas in some of the budget negotiations that went on in relation to that area. But in particular in relation to the action plan, it's right that we refresh it. We're going to do it within the context. We've now launched the Scottish economic strategy. Internationalisation is one of the 4 key areas, along with innovation and inclusive growth in the economic strategy. I'm also taking forward the refresh of the international framework, which we've informed the committee about. So the European Action Plan, it's a suite that's all going to sit together, as it should do. So it also covers how we can take forward the programme for government of prosperity, of inclusive growth, and tackling inequalities, and thirdly also in community empowerment and public services. So the idea is to make sure everything is aligned, which is that's what's probably happened previously. Whether it's in individual country plans or the European Action Plan would have appeared separately as our government developed it after 2007. So what you will see now is a far more cohesive, joined-up approach, and including the web-based approach, which I think, in my understanding, you're keen to make sure that there's some sort of practical help embedded in that, but that can be through the web-based approach, can point people. The specific points about achievements under the current EU Action Plan, I think in marine energy, that's a key area where we've proved and secured leadership in terms of that area, inclusive in the European aspect. A very practical example of that resulted in the chairmanship of one of the work streams of the European Ocean Energy Forum. Now, for Scotland to then have secured chairmanship, that's a major achievement. That includes a number of member states and others, and it's been working to recognise marine energy as a strategic technology, and some of the emission reduction areas also in this area. So that was an important area. The Vanguard Initiative, again, one where we've been working with other like-minded sub-states to deliver economic growth through development of enterprise-driven smart specialisation strategies. We've delivered 2 expert working groups in Brussels around smart manufacturing and on scoping on advanced manufacturing expertise, which Scotland has used, the SMAS area that if those of you working on in the enterprise area will be familiar with. On climate change, particularly between 2011 in terms of the meetings we've had with climate change ministers from a range of countries. It's usually taken place in the margins of an Environment Council. A very good and practical example of coordination with UK ministers. I think I've said that to the committee before. It's one of the areas where actually we've got a good relationship in terms of how we can work in a coordinated factor. And we also attended, as part of the UK delegation, the COP19 in Warsaw in December 13, given access to European ministers' coordination meetings, and we hope to target climate change engagement in the run-up to the Paris Climate Summit in December. On the National Reform Programme, actually, in terms of Scotland has submitted its own proposals on that in relation to the EU 2020 strategy and a response to the midterm in that, which I think has been important. We've also, in terms of the deepening engagement, we've signed memorandum with the French. I signed one of the memorandum myself. We also had it on education. In relation to the Nordic-Baltic policy statement, we've had far more intensive discussions and connections on the Nordic side. And I suppose the other part of it is influence. And I think in your other aspects of the committee's work, you've heard from other countries where they've been looking at the point about a lot of the European policy. It's about networks, relationships and influence. We've provided some comments to both the European Commission and rotating EU presidencies in the fields of climate change, fisheries management and environment, and a further member of staff has been seconded to the Latvian presidency. So there's more than that, but that probably gives you an area in the areas of, we talked about climate change, marine energy. And I suppose one of the areas that's really been of political importance is the opt-out in the Lisbon Treaty and the on the justice issues. And this committee and the Parliament has taken an interest, but that's involved a great deal of activity and work because obviously our justice system. And in fact, Paul Wheelhouse is at the European Council on Justice and Home Affairs as we speak today and tomorrow.
Right, thank you for that. Will the refreshed action plan differ from the current version much?
Well, I think your criticism is that does it allow flexibility to move with another priority? Because it wasn't that we weren't working in agriculture, absolutely, and I've given you a range of areas. What it will do is align better with the government's, Scotland's economic strategy launched last week, and indeed the international framework that will also be launched, we hope, towards the end of the month. We'll look at more about Scotland's place in Europe and our strategic priorities. We'll look more probably in the plan about the influencing and engaging aspects, which again you're seeing coming through in part of your evidence on Scotland's international engagement and those partnerships within the EU. And I think there's probably the areas where we'll kind of focus on will not necessarily be portfolio subjects, but how we approach things. So investing in our people and infrastructure, well, that's clearly on the kind of the skills training, youth employment areas, for example, but also, as we discussed on the Juncker package in relation to infrastructure. Fostering a culture of innovation, that's where actually pursuing the Horizon 2020 funds in a whole variety of areas, whether it's marine, climate change, or indeed agriculture. And thirdly, promoting inclusive growth and creating opportunity. And that's probably more where there has to be a political realignment within the Europe that they have to focus on jobs and recovery and what it makes a difference to people's lives. And I think you're starting to see that agenda better articulated under this Commission than perhaps previously.
Thank you. Can I continue? Referring to the Scottish Government's European Union office, one thing I'd like to know is, can you provide any examples of how the Scottish Government's Brussels office interacts with European institutions, and how much does it cost to run? I don't know if you know that figure.
The cost, if you can find the cost. In terms of the in terms of the interaction on a continual and regular basis, particularly with perm reps of the different countries, and indeed actually referring to the Latvian presidency, we hosted an event, a cultural event just last week where the majority of the Latvian permanent representatives were there, but also on a whole range of issues. I mean, for example, when I visit, they've helped engage the Commission. We've met commissioners. Indeed, one of the things I think is worth reflecting is immediately on the establishment of the new Commission, we wrote to all the commissioners from a portfolio basis from the Cabinet Secretaries. We've had very good follow-up. They're keen to follow up, and there'll be a number of meetings set up between our Cabinet Secretaries and Ministers with the European Commissioners as the Commission develops. So with the Commission itself, but also with other institutions in other countries that are there on different areas. We host events. We've had Margaret Burgess, for example, speak at one of the events on an international event on tenants and tenants' rights. Again, that's something where, you know, established by European institutions where we participate. So sometimes we lead, but sometimes engagement. There's the role of the Brussels office is absolutely about facilitation, but also an engagement with the Scottish Government back home in relation to making sure we maximise all the portfolio areas, so that all the areas of government, whether it's education or whether it's on justice or whether it's on enterprise, can access the institutions that they have. In terms of costs, it's just over £1 million in total. But it's absolutely vital that we do this, and in fact, interestingly, we've provided advice for other countries and other administrations looking to set up in Brussels as well, because it's really important to be there. Colin, do you want to say anything else on that?
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of the office's role, it is it's formally part of the UK representation. So it has a very close working relationship with the UK, and therefore works alongside them in council working groups and others to make sure that the particular Scottish issues are fully reflected in the UK line. And it's in that context also it works directly with the institutions. I mean, the Cabinet Secretary mentioned the marine energy work. Actually, that was led from the Brussels office, which, because of its presence on the spot, was able to use its ability to actually coordinate meetings with a member state group of 8. So it's a great facility, and it works also next to Scotland Europa in the same building. So that provides the opportunity for Scottish institutions, businesses and others to actually work directly with the government. And it's also it's very helpfully right in the centre, looking across the square at the main Commission building, the Burley Mall, and that's a very good way to get access.
Can I just maybe ask, I think you've visited the Brussels offices as a committee, haven't you?
Lastly, finally, does the Scottish Government's European Union engagement, especially post-referendum, dovetail with the United Kingdom's engagement in Brussels?
I think we're a bit more positive in terms of our outlook on Europe. We recognise the importance of reform, and in terms of our position, yes, it does dovetail, but of course the proposal for an in-out referendum, as the member will know, is not a position of the current UK government. The position of proposal for an in-out referendum is one of the leader of the Conservative Party, and should he be re-elected, that's part of his proposal. So because it's not part of the UK government's official policy, it allows more latitude for us to express our views, which I have done in terms of a more positive view about continuing EU membership. But to reassure you, it makes more sense, and I've said this repeatedly, there's probably more coordination and cooperation than you would necessarily know, because what you would tend to hear about in terms of media is when there are disagreements, and of which there are on occasion. But some of the coordination I've talked about around Environment Council in particular, we've got a very strong reputation. It means that we can talk to other environment ministers across Europe, and when you're dealing with obviously the volume of people to influence, doing that on a coordinated basis with the UK is very important indeed. And certainly on the Juncker package, I'm absolutely clear that we need to maximise what we can get from that, and indeed Hamza Yousaf will be taking forward the joint ministerial committees with Europe going forward, but we have made it quite clear that we can work in coordination with that to make sure that we can maximise our impact. So I think it's unfortunate that we are seeing the UK increasingly becoming distant and detached, and that's the message I'm getting consistently from Europe. So therefore its influence is less. We have to make sure that we continue to be positive, and in terms of engagement, that we have something to offer and to be a constructive voice in this, and that's what we will continue to do.
Okay, I've got Anne and then Adam.
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. Still running on the theme of the European Union Office, can I ask you, Cabinet Secretary, to provide an example of how the Scottish Government's Brussels office monitors policy developments of relevance to Scotland?
Oh, on a continuous and regular basis. That's a vast majority of what they do, but part of what we're trying to do is to make sure that it doesn't all have to be done in the Brussels office. Is actually a lot of the monitoring of development should be happening within each government department area, whether it's in education, whether it's in other areas. So that's on a continual basis. And I think that's the challenge, is the volume of material in the majority of developments. So prioritising is really important, which is why having our own action plan in terms of what our focus is helps direct them as to what they do spend more time on than in other areas. But there are areas that we really have to, because we have to comply. We've got a good record, and again, we've developed over recent years the monitoring mechanism by we have the implementation of regulations. But in areas such as agriculture, absolutely extensive, but also in areas of justice and home affairs, particularly with the recent opt-outs, absolutely critical that we're on top of what's there, and that's what they do. But anything else you want to perhaps offer, Colin?
In terms of the Brussels office, I mean, we have a representative from Marine Scotland who's there, given the very strong fisheries interest, who actually sort of leads our engagement, making sure he's able to support ministers when they're at councils in that regard. We have one of our senior officers focuses very much on the agriculture and environment portfolios, given their importance to Scotland, given the fact that these decisions have to be implemented and cover most of our agriculture and environmental policy. And then we have a very strong focus on the whole investment and innovation agenda alongside the Justice and Home Affairs. So effectively, we've got a team there who act as, to some extent, the eyes and ears of the teams back at home, but they can only operate effectively if they can link into ministers and into the officials in the departments in Edinburgh and Glasgow. And
there's a regular movement of ministers are regularly in Brussels, and I'm, as part of my role, and also with Hamza Yousaf, encouraging all ministers to be in Brussels and go to as many councils as they can, and to engage as fully as they can. Obviously, parliamentary business here requires them to vote, etc. So sometimes they can't maybe attend as often as possible. But I was very pleased, for example, in terms of the cooperation that Jamie McGregor talked about, that Angela Constance, when she was the Youth Employment Minister, led for the UK at one of the councils in one of the areas, because again, that's an area that people are very interested in our work. We, in terms of youth employment, being one of the administrations that really focuses on that, and that's in keeping actually with some of the developments that are taking place. So that's another area where we can help lead and do so in cooperation, but also and where we can influence other countries as well and learn more, which is an important part of it.
Thank you. Adam.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I'd like to ask get down to some of the nitty-gritty questions with regards to jobs and economic growth. You mentioned the support for the European Union in Scotland, and I would suggest that's largely based on the economic benefits of membership of the EU, as opposed to the political debates that are happening elsewhere. Yesterday in the Chamber, John Swinney indicated the Scottish Government had a target of growing exports by 50%. Could I ask how the refreshed EU action plan will push that agenda forward? What are we going to change to achieve that particular objective?
That's why the alignment, obviously, with the Scotland's economic strategy launched last week is critical, because you've got, particularly, as I mentioned, focus on innovation and internationalisation. In terms of the point about the importance, you know, over 300,000 jobs are in Scotland are dependent on companies that have the EU as a market. In terms of the size of it, you know, we also have an important part about the foreign direct investment that comes in, and that's an area for exports as well, in terms of how we can then connect. So it's not just about what comes in, it's what can go out as well. And there's an interesting discussion I've had recently with different countries that are interested in investing here, so they can then export from here using the innovation, technology, skills base that we have, because remember, that's our strength. And that goes back to some of the issues around Horizon 2020. Innovation is really important. People want to invest here because they can then export elsewhere. A good example, and again, it's how there's an interlinking between the skills investment, etc. I met with JSK when I was in Dublin, who've got major investments in Irvine, but also in Montrose. And one of the things that they said to me was to thank me for, when I was Cabinet Secretary for Education, for introducing a 2-for-1 life science apprenticeship. There was lots of other factors that made them invest, and they've invested over £100 million in these plants in recent years. But they knew that we were committed to skills, and an investment in people will help innovation, which comes back to this inclusive growth agenda. It's actually about how we can improve productivity and output by actually recognising inclusive growth, which means investing in young people and in women and in other areas. So that's a kind of when I said that telling the stories of individual companies and individuals can actually help argue the case for Europe. That's one example. There's also an issue around internationalisation is not just about an export focus for its own transactional trade aspect. Companies that are exposed to international activity are more likely to be innovative as well, because they learn elsewhere. One of the areas that I know Richard Lockhead's very keen on, we've had great figures on food and drink, but we can do more. And that's where, you know, that's going to be a big opportunity for us in developing the market, particularly in Europe. So I think part of it is we've got to think about it. It's not just about exports to Europe, it's actually using the European investment to help us grow our internationalisation within Scotland of our companies, so they can export not just to Europe but beyond Europe. So I think that's where we're going to see the linkages.
So is there any way we're going to engage in a different fashion to try and push ahead with these particular objectives?
I mean, again, a very practical thing that will come out from the economic strategy, which I've also been involved in from the international portfolio, is ensuring that we have a One Scotland partnership across the world. You'll see that very heavily in our international framework, but also international innovation. You know, the idea of innovation investment hubs and the location of them will allow us then to better corral and bring together all the agencies from Scotland that can help promote that export agenda. So they're practical things that are in the economic strategy, which will be a part of the European Action Plan and will also be part of our overarching international framework. So that's a very key focus on trade and investment. But it's not just about the transactional aspect. The innovation is key, and that's where actually the added value from Scotland, if we can mobilise our activity around Horizon 2020, because remember, it's SMEs that we need to get exporting more as well. That's going to be one of the kind of key tricks for us.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Anzala.
Good morning,
Good morning.
Cabinet Secretary, and welcome to our committee in a sunny morning. You've had an opportunity to visit the US, and you plan to visit them again in the future. With that experience...
Sorry, can you want to repeat that? Sorry.
Yes, of course. The welcome or the actual question.
Or whatever.
Well, let me formally welcome you again to this sunny morning. And I was just saying that you've had an opportunity to visit the US, and you're planning other visits as well. So with that experience, how flexible do you think the Scottish Government's EU action plan is in response to the emergency policies? For example, the TTIP.
Well, it can be and it will be. I mean, and that's why I think actually I focus more on ensuring that we've got a better focus on relationships, network, partnerships, engagement is critical. I mean, not having, obviously, you know, TTIP wasn't in the European Action Plan of 2020 2009, because obviously that was being developed, but it hasn't stopped us responding to it. Similarly, in terms of the European, the priorities from this committee will not have had TTIP in it in previous years, so you've adapted to circumstances as they arise, and that's what the priorities are. And I think that's one of the things that's really important, is coordinating across government how we do that. I certainly do that with Cabinet colleagues, but also Hamza Yousaf brings together the ministers with particular interests on European matters, whether it's in public health, whether it's in rural areas, whether it's in with enterprise, to make sure that we can be cited across interests, but also if there's an emerging political imperative for us all to coordinate in one area, we'll be able to do that a bit more nimbly, which is what I think everybody expects us to do.
Yes, I think the $6 million question really is that although we have now amended our action plan, what I would be really interested in knowing is this going to be a working document for us, or are we going to be stuck for this for a period of time? Because as we quite clearly have seen from experience, that Europe, and TTIP in particular, is quite a changing, developing scene. And I'm just wondering, how does that set us in responding to that, and what the timeframes are for that response?
I think that's a very important point. I mean, the European Action Plan will sit as part of our international framework, which in itself will sit within the wider economic strategy as well. And in terms of the European Action Plan, as with the international framework, we want it to be able to be more of a live document. That's why it will be web-based. It's why it will be regularly updated. There are policy statements and positions you might take on an annual basis, which are provided back, which, there's movements, but the plan should allow people to be aligned in what their focus is, but allow a responsiveness. And it needs to be more interactive, so it'll be more of a live document than, say, a document that was produced by a minister in 2009 that kind of, you might have got an annual written update, but this is going to be far more interactive. And it also provides that portal, which I think you were looking for in your discussions about how people who are interested in access. It's not the be-on end-all. Obviously, Scottish Europa, different organisations have an important platform, but we'll be able to try and link to the relevant areas that can help provide positions. But it means that it can be more evolving, and it's also important that it provides a kind of, it'll be a go-to area for information, but also any comment, speeches, developments that take place, we can also access that and put it on. So that's the shape of it will be.
Just finally on this, in terms of the office in Brussels, do we have somebody who's actually going to be responsible to make sure that we actually deliver that more actively, rather than just have it on the web itself? Do we have...
We'll pass this over to the person responsible. Apart from myself.
Yes, I mean, the answer is, one of the great advantages of where we are now in terms of where we were then is that now we have a clear set of priorities for the next 5 years that were set by the European Council and the Commission last summer. And we also have a very clear set of priorities from Scotland and the new economic strategy. So our aim is to make sure that both are aligned and that we use that as the framework for taking it forward. And in fact, the preparation of the action plan is something being done jointly by the team in Edinburgh and the team in Brussels, which support the Cabinet Secretary. So we will be endeavouring to make sure that it is taken forward actively, and that the reports that are done and the updates that are done can reflect the situation as it develops.
So I've got strategic responsibility for our European and external affairs activities. Hamza Yousaf will take forward particularly relations with the UK domestically. I'll be carrying out more of our bilateral relationships, so that's at a political level. Yes. And we'll also coordinate with colleagues. In terms of the civil service, Colin is the Deputy Director and responsible for European and UK relations, and spends a considerable amount of time in Brussels and with the Brussels team. So that's why I definitely thought it would be helpful to bring it.
Was helpful.
You know where the responsibility lies as well.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Okay, Rod Campbell.
Thank you, Convener. Morning, Cabinet Secretary.
Good morning.
If I may, I'd just like to refer to a couple of issues. One is, obviously, I'm pleased that Paul Wheelhouse is in Brussels today. In terms of that trip and visit, is it possible to get some kind of feedback fed through to this committee, or what would be the plan?
I'm just trying to think what we would normally do. I mean, obviously the issues that were there will be particularly of interest to the Justice Committee, and I'm not. I think that's something we should maybe discuss with yourselves and the clerks as to how we can update. I obviously, or it will now be Hamza Yusuf will update you. Following GMC Europe discussions, they tend to be done to the committee of subject. And again, this committee has been trying to encourage all the subject committees to be more proactive in that European agenda. I would be a bit reluctant to change that and have this committee as being the only place that reports come back to. But certainly if there's a readout of that, I'll make sure that this committee on that one...
I certainly wasn't suggesting that, Cabinet Secretary. I obviously wear two hats because I'm on the Justice Committee and I'm the European Rapporteur. But
and actually, I'm assuming that you get updates on Council activity from time to time from ministers, or do you request that as a committee member?
It doesn't necessarily formally form part of the agenda. Obviously, I don't want to step on anyone's toes, but it seems to me that kind of both committees are kind of interested in this issue. But
we could certainly look about how, because it's kind of how to make sure it's done on a meaningful basis, that you're not overloaded with information you can't necessarily or won't necessarily need to work with, and without creating a bureaucratic administrative burden on everybody, so we can concentrate on getting things done. But it's something we can look about, and maybe some feedback from the committee as to, you know, if you... I suspect actually talking to your European rapporteurs in each of your committees as to how things are working in terms of knowing what's happening. Bearing in mind we've now got a new ministerial team, it's probably not an unreasonable time to have a kind of refresh as to how that works and works well. Okay. But I would caution against over bureaucracy is the only thing I would say.
Fine. Can I move on to my next point then? The second point is just really how kind of, given the Latvian presidency of the EU, and we'll shortly be hearing from Latvian ambassador, the Latvian priorities, how that fitted with the Scottish Government's own agenda. I was particularly interested in the third Latvian President priority, Engaged Europe, which touches on, obviously, concerns about conflicts on their doorstep. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
You know, I think an Engaged Europe is really critical. It's part of our proposals on a reformed Europe as well that we put forward, and it is that concentration on making sure that Europe is addressing the issues of concern. I think jobs is most definitely one of them. I think security is another, particularly either in energy or indeed in security of individual countries. It's also an area that obviously those countries that are to the east of Europe have serious concerns about. Indeed, the Lithuanians, when they were in presidency, also did a great deal of concentration on the European partnerships. Whether Europe acted and functioned as engaged as it should have been. Engaged is two-way. Engaged is engaged with your internal citizens, which is a key aspect, I think, of what the Latvians want to pursue. But also, I think there is a clear focus for European external affairs policy now led by the High Representative Mogherini, and in terms of the activity that she's been involved in, I think it's quite strategic. I think it's important, particularly in the southern borders. And I think that's the balance. And you heard from the Italian presidency, for example, when the ambassador was here, he was requesting that the southern partnership and the southern borders weren't put to one side in favour of what was happening in relation to concerns about the East, and particularly in relation to Ukraine. So I think that balancing act is a very hard one, because they should be able to be doing both. And you know, I've raised my concerns with the UK government. I've said it in this committee as well. You know, the Mediterranean is becoming the watery graveyard of Europe, and so therefore, you know, strategically long term, whether it's to do with climate change, and long term in the north of Africa, or indeed the conflicts are there, that has to be dealt with. But at the same time, you'll have a presidency which would understandably be very focused, and quite rightly, on concerns to the eastern borders. And I think that's going to be the challenge for Europe going forward, is how does it make sure, in terms of its European external relations policy, it can do so in a way that addresses everybody's concerns without being too diluted to have a meaningful impact.
Okay, thank you. Willie Coffey.
Thanks very much, Convener. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary. The Commission has just 2 or 3 weeks ago published its Digital Economy and Society Index report, and in there it shows a range of kind of performance indicators over a sort of range of digital services, if you like, and particularly in the one called integration of digital services. That's the one that's showing the least progress in Europe, and the UK, for example, is in the lower half of the performance table in terms of these types of services. It includes things like online selling and cross-border selling and things like that. What's your response to the news that we're hearing that the UK government and other European governments have decided to backtrack on their commitment to abolish roaming charges for another 3 years to 2018? That's been reported in the press that that's what the governments have done, and of course that does nothing, in my view, to assist consumers and to help the integration of digital services, and it just makes matters worse. So what's your view on that, and what influence could the Scottish Government bring to bear on that with the UK?
Well, bearing in mind, one, our concentration on exporting, a lot of exporting will be done not just within Europe in terms of using digital technology, but also globally. You're seeing that market develop, which is part of that innovation and internationalisation agenda I talked about earlier. Clearly, it's disappointing the UK are moving that direction because it's in our interest. We are an exporting nation. We want to have growth through international and innovative practices. I think it's, therefore, in terms, I suppose, if I was looking at the Latvian presidency's priorities, and obviously you can speak to the ambassador about that in the following session, but I think that their clear focus on a digital Europe will be really important at this time. I think they could make a clear and distinct difference in driving this forward in terms of different issues around digitalising the public sector, safety and security issues, but also the EU's digital single market strategy is really, really important as you've set out. And I think of all the recent presidencies, there's been an understanding of the clear need for this, but I do think the Latvians will be able to offer a great deal in terms of leadership in this agenda, and I hope that they can communicate that to the UK as well. And I think that that's part of our responsibility, both as ministers in the European area, but also Keith Brown and his responsibilities in infrastructure as well. I think we need to make sure that we are influencing the UK on a positive agenda. I hope coming out of the Westminster election we might be in a more enlightened position in relation to the digital market from a new incoming UK government. But I do think that that connectivity and infrastructure is critical. And it's not just a self-interest from Scotland. Europe has to do it because we're not going to compete on low-value products. It's got to be high value, and that's why the digital connectivity is absolutely crucial. And in an area that I've got a keen interest in, creative industries, Scotland has a lot to offer, a lot to contribute, and unless we've got a better digital framework to do that, then that will impede us in a growth area.
In terms of that, I mean, has the UK government consulted with the Scottish Government on that really crucial matter? Because it's been of interest to this committee particularly for a number of years.
Unless Colin can contribute to this, I think it's an area that was probably best dealt with at portfolio level by the relevant Cabinet Secretary, and on the digital infrastructure, that's Keith Brown's responsibility.
Okay. Right.
Yeah. Cabinet Secretary, I think that's exhausted our questions for you this morning. Can we thank you very much? I know that was a very condensed and intense evidence session, but extremely helpful indeed. Just on behalf of the committee, can I thank you for coming along with me? We look forward to engaging with the Scottish Government's European engagement strategy in the future. Thank you. I'm going to suspend very briefly just to allow our witnesses to change over. Okay, welcome back to the European External Relations Committee. Agenda item 2 this morning is our topic, the presidency of the Council of the European Union. And can I welcome to committee this morning His Excellency Andris Tekmanis, who is Ambassador of the Republic of Latvia in the UK, Slovega Kalna is the Deputy Head of Mission at the Embassy of Latvia, and our very own John McGregor, who is the Honorary Consul of Latvia in Scotland. Could I welcome you all to our committee this morning? We're delighted to have you here, and can we thank you very much for the wonderful reception you provided us with last night. The fantastic music, especially the last piece, I have to say. I see Twitter went mad raving about it last night, so we're very, very grateful for that. Ambassador, I believe you have an opening statement you would like to give the committee this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, Chairman, members of committee, first allow me to thank you for inviting me to your committee meeting and allowing me to share our considerations on priorities of Latvian presidency in the Council of European Union. This is a very great challenge for Latvia. 11 years after joining the EU, this is our first presidency. We have in European Union member countries, a number of countries who have great experience in conducting presidencies, 6 or 9 times. This is our first. The time has changed as well, and probably the next presidency for EU member countries may come after 14 or 15 years. So it is a particular challenge. And we as a small country want to make our presidency efficient, useful, and very much reflecting the needs of the time. And that this assumption was when we have chosen the major objectives and priorities of our presidency. Probably the most important task of our presidency was fully overcome financial and economic crisis. And we see that we can overcome this crisis being more competitive. And therefore, we have chosen 3 major areas. We are concentrating our efforts. It is competitive Europe, digital Europe, and engaged Europe. Competitive Europe means creating jobs and coming back to economic growth. We see several instruments that can be helpful to implement this program. One is Commission's plan for investments, or Juncker plan, is 315 billion euros devoted to investment package, affordable for big companies, affordable for small and medium-sized companies. We have advanced quite well in this direction. We hope that until the end of our presidency, we will be able to fully launch this plan. Last week, ECOFIN Council, no, even this week, ECOFIN Council has endorsed a strategic investment fund, and Commission has also published a green paper on capital market union. That's another instrument we see as a good tool to get access to investments for SMEs, for any companies. And we hope very much that these instruments could be a good boost for recovering of European economy and getting back to growth, creating jobs. We are caring very much on social dimension, and therefore, well, that's also Latvian experience from the time when we had to overcome financial and economic crisis. One of the key factors was maintain good dialogue with social partners, and therefore we are also very much engaged to keeping social dialogue with in this three-party summit with employers, with trade unions. We are working on implementation of banking union and all the mechanisms of banking union. Well, no particular new approaches are envisaged, but we want to launch and check how the newly created structures are properly functioning. One of the key elements of competitive Europe is efficient energy policy, and here we are determined to move on with creation of energy union. And again, we have advanced quite well. In the beginning of February in Riga, a high-level conference took place, and an energy union was discussed, and just now our energy union strategy was endorsed by Energy Council. So we are also expecting that March European Council will give its green light for energy union, and then in June Council already next legislative acts will be adopted to implement this energy union. We see energy union as very crucial in our time. It is a part of European security, not only part of European economy, and to our vision we see energy union based on 5 major principles. Principle of solidarity, principle of interconnected energy market, an efficient common energy diplomacy, competitive energy independence, diversification of sources and diversification of delivery, and good governance across energy policy. We have quite a good experience in Baltic Sea region, how good governance, how efficient governance of all these principles is being created. Countries around Baltic Sea are doing very much to interconnect different kind of energy sources. There are gas pipelines crossing the countries around Baltic with an ultimate goal to create a common gas grid around Baltic Sea. There are electricity cables from Estonia to Finland, from Lithuania to Sweden, from Lithuania to Poland, so it gives also, from Latvia to Estonia, well, it gives really an efficient tool to change when necessary the flows of energy, flows of electricity, differentiation of sources. At the same time, common Baltic energy stock market, stock exchange gives an opportunity to buy in one exchange electricity, even not knowing who is producing this electricity, and that gives a real alternative and real competition between energy companies. Certainly, we see that we are very much like-minded with United Kingdom in matters of development and strengthening of single market and all the regulatory framework of single market. So it will be one of the permanent issues on competition councils, and we are determined to make single market more efficient, more affordable, and a good tool to strengthen competitions among companies in European Union. Digital Europe. Digital Europe is one of the key elements of competitiveness, and we look at our digital philosophy is based on assumption that digital solutions should be found by default. That means that first we are looking for new challenges, how to cope with them, based on digital solutions and digital opportunities that it is giving for Europe enormous opportunities for trade, for movement of goods and services. At the same time, we are thinking about issues like data protection, security of information systems, accessibility of web, and of course education among youngsters particularly, and on cyber security strategy. All these issues we are going to discuss during Digital Assembly that will take place in Riga in June 17-18. There are a number of quite challenging issues on this agenda. I can mention a few of them, like telecommunication package, that is quite a difficult item, because across Europe we see number of, or even great number of different actors and stakeholders who, among companies and states, who have different interests and maybe different level of development in telecommunications sphere. And the discussions are not going very easy, but we want to push them ahead in order to get some affordable compromise in the issues on roaming and on telecommunication tariffs. We hope we will advance as much as possible, and we won't leave too much to our trio partner Luxembourg. Digital single market is also a crucial point on agenda, and it is in our interest to develop as much as possible digital single market, bearing in mind that it should safeguard quality of services and on reasonable costs for customers. We are advancing Network and Information Security Directive. It is a very, very crucial for further development of digital market in Europe, for protection of consumers. Here we are also working on data, personal data protection, on a program on interoperability solution for European public administration. We are working on more implementation on e-government, e-governance, e-services offered by governments. So it is really very vast agenda, and we are happy to share our own experience we are using in Latvia. And in Latvia, digital services are used very much. Solutions of digital government are used very much, and well, sometimes the opportunity to use free Wi-Fi across Latvia is considered by many as a part of their daily human rights. If I'm moving towards connected Europe, I would speak about two major points. One point is trade issues, and here we are concentrating on advancing free trade negotiations, starting with TTIP. Well, there are a lot of discussions around TTIP everywhere in the press, in different media, among politicians. There are many questions put related to TTIP negotiations, issues like GMO, issues like transparency of the negotiation process, issues whether TTIP negotiations may affect health services. Well, on one hand, presidency is not directly involved in TTIP negotiations. It's a mandate of European Commission, of course, and European Commission is conducting these negotiations quite actively. There have been already 8 negotiation rounds, and 2 more are envisaged during Latvian presidency. But we are trying to push the whole negotiation process ahead. We are representing EU position on different conferences, global conferences discussing trade. And we are also working on increasing transparency of negotiations. Certainly, we should keep in mind that transparency can't be one-sided. Well, we are not, due to transparency issues, we are not interested to weaken the positions of negotiator teams. Of course not. Well, but at the same time, if the public demand is high to see more information about, like health service, but I think health service, these issues questions were put and answers were given quite recently. Commissioner Malmström was visiting London, and she quite explicitly told that health services are separated from the negotiation mandate of TTIP. We are also pushing ahead other free trade agreements on agenda of Commission, like, CETA, agreement with Canada is already approved, but it should be implemented, and we are pushing the process of approval by Parliament of this agreement. We are working as well on pushing ahead EU-Japan FTA, FTA with Vietnam. So we think that these negotiations, although the mandate is very huge and the points are really many, the agenda is vast, and of course negotiators should think about the reasonable compromise. Well, not at any point in such negotiations you can win, but I think at the very end Commission will do its job very properly and in interest of member countries and Europeans. Another important area of our program of Connected Europe is development of European neighborhood policy. Neighborhood policy to the southern direction and to the eastern direction. We having more knowledge and experience how to do with eastern direction. We are concentrating our efforts on developing and advancing Eastern Partnership policy of European Union, and we are planning to host in Riga Eastern Partnership Summit in May 21-22. We hope on a good participation, on high-level participation in this summit. Not an easy time for convening summit, but as the previous experience shows, well, every member country having presidency is planning its own agenda, but it should be prepared also for challenges coming from not planned regions or not planned topics. So we haven't particularly envisaged in our agenda the finding solution on Greek issues. We neither have particularly planned something, a crisis in Ukraine, but we are facing it, and we should respond to these challenges. And we see that the European Partnership policy has, since its launch in 2007, it has become a more individual, although at that time all 6 countries were standing on the same line, and now after 8 years we see that there are front runners, and there are countries that are still a little bit hesitating of going more deeply in relationship with the European Union. And I find it's quite normal, it's good that, well, we see, well, we can't, instead of these countries, we can't wish to approach more closely or take over the standards of European standards and values, but they have to decide themselves. And that's a not maybe easy political decision for them. And we see now how at least 3 countries are advancing: Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova. They have advanced in matters of association agreements, in matters of mobility agreements, in different programs of rule of law implementation in these countries. And there are countries like Azerbaijan, Moldova, and Armenia, who have probably the more flexible agenda, but we want to shape the policy towards each of these countries, to make a tailor-made policy to each of these countries, and during the summit in Riga we want to set a new set of guidelines for the future, how to move ahead in relations with these countries. We also want to review European Central Asia strategy, a region that is playing quite a crucial role for Europe, not only as a part of common energy policy, but we should not lose it out of sight, that this is a region where quite substantial energy resources are located. But this is also a region that is quite important for Asian security policy, having in mind what's going on in Afghanistan, what's going on in Pakistan, what's going on in Iraq. These countries are quite concerned about all these processes, and EU should work together with them, and we have concentrated on 3 major directions in cooperation with these countries. It's sustainable development, strengthening of rule of law and market economy, border security, and education. Well, these three directions we think that could be beneficial and very useful for these countries as well, will be beneficial for interests of European Union. All the neighborhood policies have quite a particular security dimension, and we see how security situation in Europe has changed just during the last year. And we should respond to these challenges. We should respond to these changes. And therefore, we have envisaged also during our presidency in June summit, June European Council, we should reshape and review European security strategy, a quite crucial document. Of course, we will work together with European External Action Service that will prepare this revised strategy, but it is essential to give a proper response on the new security challenging the existing security architecture and security order in Europe has changed, whether we like it or not, but it has. So we have to find a proper response and increase European security. Of course, we know that European security very much is based on strong transatlantic link, and that should be taken into account. But there are new challenges. Well, just in these days, Russia has stepped out of CFE Conventional Forces Treaty, and that's not a good signal indeed. Well, Europe need to find a proper response. Also, a proper response by finding appropriate finances for defense issues. Even having in mind that maybe 20 years, European politicians used to live in a very nice and kind conditions, relationship among countries, and they were used to find best solutions through diplomatic means, through negotiations and finding compromise. Well, we see that we should not neglect current situation, and we should assess this current situations, and we should not forget about proper financing of defense policies as well. I could of course tell you much more about climate policy, about enlargement, about migration issues, but these all issues are on the agenda of our Latvian presidency, but I'll try to save your time, and I'll be happy to give a response to your questions about some particular issues, and thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you. That was extremely comprehensive and covered every topic I think that we've looked at on the committee. Willie Coffey.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Ambassador. I'd like to ask you a question on the digital single market, which I was asking our Cabinet Secretary, I think, when you came in to join us at the meeting. The European Commission has just published its Digital Economy and Society Index, and it shows us that in the area of integrating digital services, this is the poorest in terms of performance of a range of services in the digital economy in Europe. How then can you explain the European government's decision to delay the abolition of roaming charges, data roaming charges, for another 3 years? Does that not give the wrong message to European consumers about our intentions to create a digital single market?
Well, I wouldn't call it as delay. Well, simply these negotiations are moving, we should acknowledge, not very fast. As I mentioned, there are a number of different stakeholders. Well, we should take into account interests of companies. Well, they shouldn't have losses, but in offering telecommunication services. But at the same time, I think European Commission has already a number of years ago have started to limit roaming charges at, well, 10 years ago, you may remember, they were enormous. If you were traveling somewhere outside your own country, you were faced with, well, probably maybe 5 or 10 times higher roaming charges than you were paid in, you were paying in your own country. Now, well, the goal is to align roaming charges with national charges. Well, but to achieve this, a good compromise should be found, and a number of issues of companies of different member countries should be taken into account, and that's a reason I don't call. I don't think that the Commission is somehow delaying the whole process. Well, simply there are too many actors around this issue, and therefore this negotiation process is not as quick as maybe we would wish to have. But I think more important, and for us as a presidency, is more important to land to a good compromise, not to force one or other issue, but to get some agreement across 28. And therefore, I wouldn't say that it's somehow delayed, but simply the process is quite complicated due to the fact that there are many actors and many stakeholders in taking part.
My understanding is that the roaming charges were supposed to be abolished by the end of this year, And I was wanting to ask if, during your country's presidency, you will continue to press for that at the earliest opportunity so that consumers in Europe can get a better deal and that Europe can move towards a true integrated digital market that I'm sure we all support.
Well, we really need to find a compromise. Our goal is transactions between service providers and service consumers are safe and secure. And that's quite essential to take also into account the aspect of security. We should also take into account aspect of personal data security. When we are discussing this package, we should take into account how we can fight cyber criminals that are not so few in our time. So, well, there are really a number of different aspects on the whole package, and well, services, interests of consumers and interests of service providers are essential from both sides, and that's what we are trying to find the most appropriate solution.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Jimmy McGregor.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, Ambassador. In your talk, your very articulate talk, you've answered most of the questions I was going to answer. But I'm pleased to see that you're hosting the Eastern Partnership Summit in Riga. What is your, in terms of the developments that have happened recently in the Ukraine, and your worries about security, what part do you see the Eastern Partnership playing in that?
I think when EU was starting its neighborhood policy, that was late 90s, and focusing more its orientation towards southern region and afterwards towards eastern regions, the ultimate goal was, of course, first, economic development, and second, its security. And having in mind that, and that's quite a legitimate approach to consider that democratic countries with responsible government, with common market rules, are more stable, more predictable, more reliable neighbors for European Union member countries. Well, that was probably the ultimate, to cut short, the ultimate goal of European neighborhood policy. And at the same time, it is a sovereign decision of any European state whether to choose such option or not. Well, and we see today that Eastern Partnership policy is a very good example that European Union is conducting policy based on free choice. And we see that there are frontrunners, 3 countries who have declared that they want to align with European standards, align with European values. And of course, if European Union is considering itself as a union of values, it should defend values and endorse these values if other countries want to align with these values. At the same time, if countries like Armenia or Azerbaijan or Belarus, they are maybe still hesitating and looking for different options, how they are shaping their foreign policy, it's a discretion to choose it. And it's not European Union who are imposing, somehow pressing them to accept one single model. Well, one size doesn't fit all, and I think Eastern Partnership policy is the best example that it's not the case. But in general, I think democratic Ukraine based on rule of law, on strong democratic institutions, based on market economy, and rules that are observed in, let's say, Poland and Ukraine, on both sides of the border. It is in general interests of European Union. It is in general interest of Ukraine. But it is, again, it's sovereign decision by Ukrainians. And they have, well, a year ago, they made their desperate attempt and desperate decision to turn to these European values, to come closer to European values. And I think it's very much obligation of European Union to be as much helpful, provide as much assistance as possible to Ukraine. So far, it is a philosophy of Eastern Partnership. And I think this is a partnership, even I can say bilateral partnership in a common frame between EU and any of these countries. It's not directed towards any other country. Well, sometimes Russia is claiming that it's somehow directed against Russia. Well, it's not. Well, it's up to the European Union to shape its own foreign policy. European Union shouldn't ask, well, neither Russia nor America, how to develop the relations with Morocco, or with Ukraine, or with Egypt. It's a discretion of European Union to do. As well, Russia is not asking European Union when it's implementing projects of Eurasian Economic Union, although it does concern also interests of European Union, but it's discretion of Russia or any other country. So it is, we should honor sovereign decisions of states, and that's what European Union is doing.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm also delighted that you want to see, alongside the secure financial sector, you want to promote growth and jobs. And you think that TTIP may possibly be a way of kick-starting a spark to lift the stagnation in the Eurozone, which obviously would make the Eurozone more attractive and European values more attractive as well. On that case, we have the Common Agricultural Policy, and I'm delighted to see that that Latvia would like to simplify the Common Agricultural Policy. Do you have any views on how that might be done?
Well, I think Common Agricultural Policy demands quite a sensitive discussion across all 28 member states. We haven't envisaged during our presidency some very substantial shift in common agriculture policy. Common agriculture policy and financial framework of common agriculture policy has been set 2 years ago, and the basic principles of financing have been set. Well, we can consider that by implementing of common agriculture policy, we need to discuss the reducing of administrative burden, reducing of red tape with regard to common agriculture policy, and well, that's what in our plans of presidency we have envisaged discussion in Ministerial Council in March. As well, we hope that this discussion will be continued in May. We are not about to somehow challenge or change agreed decisions on common agriculture policy or on reform of common agriculture policy. But we want to make common agriculture policy more efficient. We have invited all the member states to present their proposals, in which areas the administrative burden with regard to farmers could be reduced, and we are looking forward to advance with this discussion to make the life of the farmers more easy and not to burden them with too many reports, papers, any other administrative burdens.
Can I carry on?
I've got 2 other members waiting, Jamie, if you don't mind, I'll bring you in.
I just want a very small question then.
Really quickly then, go on.
Yes, you mentioned one of the things about TTIP is worries about food safety legislation. And you mentioned here advanced legislation, advancing legislation on food safety, and particularly on novel food. Do you see this as a problem with via the US, which doesn't appear to have such strong safety precautions on food as the European?
I think food safety certainly is, and Commission negotiating team knows it, that food safety is very sensitive across all the European Union member countries, and certainly it is attaching a particular attention to food safety, and therefore, well, it's also taking into account that in European Union member countries, the attitude towards genetically modified products is quite negative, and I think that is a point that is taken into account by conducting these negotiations. Also, the issues of production safety, the contamination of soil, contamination of environment, that's also issues that are affecting food safety and food quality, and these issues are also taken into account. During our presidency, we have envisaged in April in the Council of Agriculture Council, we have envisaged a discussion about food safety and genetically modified products. So we think that ministers will come to a proper position defending the interests of all the member countries.
Okay, we're quickly running out of time. Rod Campbell.
Good morning, Ambassador. I've got 2 kind of different points. One is in a helpful submission prepared by Scotland Europa in relation to your presidency. There is reference in the Justice and Home Affairs section to the creation of a bill of new psychoactive substances, legal highs, which is a subject that this Parliament's shown interest in. Are you able to help us with any more information on that? Legal highs?
Sorry, I couldn't understand. Could you spell it a little bit louder? Sorry.
I'm referring to a Scotland Europa submission in relation to matters affecting justice and home affairs. There is reference to data protection packages and the pursuit of fraud in relation to European financial interests, but there's also references to what's described as the creation of a bill of new psychoactive substances. Is that anything you can help us with? If not, don't worry, I'll move on. Drugs. Well, yeah. I'm quite happy to move on if you're not able to add to that discussion. Yeah.
Well, it's very, very specific issue. I probably could in this moment I can reply rather generally that of course the consumption of drugs and appearing of new type of drugs that are not yet listed and still are presenting high danger for consumers, particularly among young people. It is on the top of our agenda, and certainly our presidency will do its utmost to get a proper regulations that is not affecting the health and security of particularly young people who and it's raising awareness on their knowledge on on consequences of such use of dangerous drugs. I can maybe find and send you in writing some more explicit answer. Well, today I could give only some rather general answers. Sorry for that.
My second point was in relation to CETA. I think you referred earlier on to the question of trying to get approval for CETA by the European Parliament. My understanding, last time I looked at this, and I might be a bit out of date, it was the European Parliament had only had one plenary session in relation to CETA. Obviously, there is considerable concern about TTIP over here, and CETA, in some respects, kind of sets that path. Are you able to help us with any further information on the process of scrutiny of CETA at the European level?
Well, European Parliament is following really very closely to negotiations of TTIP, but we, of course, should take into account that as soon the negotiations are conducted, well, European Parliament can't make any decision on, well, neither on negotiation process nor on the result, because there is no result yet. Of course, European Parliament will very carefully scrutinize TTIP when the negotiations will be finished. But I think it's very important, and we as presidency have had a very substantive dialogue with European Parliament on issues on TTIP, and we are intending to continue with this dialogue because I think it's very important for a negotiating team to know what European Parliament is thinking about the whole process, for instance, about the level of transparency of the negotiating process, and where are the particular interests of European Parliament with regard to maybe particular topics. But at the same time, we are expecting now that European Parliament will start ratification procedures of CETA, of Canada Agreement. Well, negotiations are finished. Now it's European Parliament job to do its part. So, and we from our side, we as presidency are trying to move flexibly this Canada Agreement ahead in order to achieve Parliament's approval.
Okay, I'll leave it there, I think. Convener.
Finally, Adam.
Thank you, Convener, and welcome, Ambassador. Like Scotland, Latvia is a relatively small country in Europe. But unlike Scotland, you're a member state of the European Union in your own right. And as I understand it, this is your first term as, or assuming the role of EU presidency. Could I ask what kind of impact that's had in Latvia itself, assuming the role of EU presidency, and what impact it's had on your international relationships?
Well, I think that's really a very philosophical question, and thank you for it. Membership in the European Union for a small country like Latvia gives enormous opportunities to increase its global influence through the structures of European Union, through the mechanisms of relationship between European Union and other countries and regions of the world. And therefore, in this respect, Latvia as a small country is gaining its importance in the world. And of course, assuming the challenges of presidency, It is something particular, of course. It brings more knowledge in the world about our country. Well, we should recognize that probably people in most of countries of the globe are not waking up in the morning with the first thought, what's going on in Latvia? Probably not. Many of them really don't know where Latvia is. And that's an excellent, an enormous opportunity to bring knowledge about Latvia. So next Sunday, I'm accredited to Australia and New Zealand. I'm going with a particular presidency program, information program, to bring information to Australians and New Zealanders about Latvia. We can use this time of presidency to increase knowledge about my own country, and we are happy about it. Of course, it costs quite a lot. Well, any presidency costs millions and millions, but well, it costs also very much engagement and work. But Latvians are not afraid of work. They are happy to work and work hard. So this is an enormous opportunity for a small country to be more visible on global scale. Certainly, we should somehow put aside our very strictly national interests, and we should work on achieving a compromise among all 28 member countries. And, well, that's a sign of successful presidency, how a country can achieve an appropriate compromise among all the member countries, not so much how this country could advance their own proper interests. Then it would be really not the best presidency. But we are trying to do our best in promoting the interests of the whole European Union. But I should say these common interests are very much in line with our national interests. So we are working as well for our national sake in well, having a successful presidency. So it is a real challenge for us. That's the first presidency for Latvia, but I think we can cope with it. Well, Latvians are quite pragmatic. Well, we are more to the north, and we are used to not very favorable nature conditions. We know that we should fight for ourselves permanently to be strong, and I think that helps us also by conducting this presidency.
Okay, well, thank you very much, and we wish you every success.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And on that note, Ambassador, that concludes our time with you this morning. Can I, on behalf of the committee, thank you very much for a very, very comprehensive insight into your presidency and the work that you've already done and the future work that you have in the pipeline. And as Adam Ingram said, we wish you every success in that. You're quite welcome to stay with us until we just conclude one final piece of business at committee this morning, and then we can have a formal introduction to the committee afterwards. Yeah. Okay. Agenda item 3 is the Brussels Bulletin. Now, given that we have used up all of our time this morning, could I suggest if there's any questions, queries, clarifications on the Brussels Bulletin, you direct those to the clerks. And we forward the Brussels Bulletins to the relevant committee. Committee agreed? Thank you very much indeed. We now suspend to go into our private session, and I have to remind members we have a committee report to conclude this morning too. And I thank you all for coming along, and we'll see you at the next meeting. I now suspend the meeting and go into private. Thank you very much.